Most people think risk is something you avoid, something dangerous, something reckless. That assumption feels sensible, it sounds mature, responsible, even intelligent. From an early age, we're taught that good decisions are careful decisions. That wisdom looks like caution. That stability is something to protect, not question. And in many obvious cases, that logic works. Touching the stove hurts. Speeding increases the odds of an accident. Ignoring warning signs leads to trouble. So the lesson sticks early and deeply. Risk equals harm. But that simple framing quietly shapes decisions in ways that don't reveal their cost until much later. Not as dramatic failures, not as sudden collapses, but as slow, compounding losses that feel invisible while they're happening. Risk feels obvious when it's loud. Sudden losses, public mistakes, sharp downturns that demand attention and trigger emotion. Those moments are easy to label as risky because the consequences are immediate and visible. What's much harder to see is the damage caused by avoiding risk entirely. The kind of damage that doesn't trigger alarms, the kind that doesn't feel like failure, the kind that builds quietly, decision by decision, year after year. The most expensive risks rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive as disasters. They hide inside choices that feel safe, reasonable, and responsible in the moment. Choices that protect you from discomfort today while quietly limiting your future. That's why so many people misunderstand risk, not because they're careless, not because they're reckless, but because they're focused on the wrong signals. They're watching for visible danger while ignoring invisible decay. The common belief is simple: reduce risk, increase stability, protect yourself from downside. We're told that the smart move is to minimize exposure, to choose certainty whenever it's available, to avoid paths that could go wrong, even if they might also go right. This belief shows up everywhere. In careers, it sounds like staying where you're comfortable because it's secure. In money, it looks like avoiding volatility at all costs. In business, it shows up as refusing to experiment because mistakes might be visible, and this belief persists for a reason. It often works in the short term. Avoiding visible loss feels like progress. Nothing breaks, nothing collapses. You don't look foolish. You don't feel regret. You can point to the absence of problems as proof that you're doing something right. Stability feels like control, and control feels like intelligence. When nothing goes wrong, it's easy to assume things are going right. But the absence of visible loss is not the same as forward movement, and stability, when misunderstood, can quietly become a liability rather than a strength. Many decisions don't fail loudly. They fail silently, by preventing learning, by preventing feedback, by preventing improvement. They don't destroy what you have. They just stop you from building what you could have had. When you choose certainty over exposure, you often give up the chance to discover something better. And because nothing explodes, the cost stays hidden. It doesn't show up as pain. It shows up as limitation. That's why this belief is so persistent. It rarely produces immediate consequences. It produces delayed ones. The problem isn't caution. The problem is misunderstanding what risk actually is and how it behaves over time. Risk is not a single event. It's exposure repeated over time. And repetition changes everything. Most people imagine risk as one decision with one outcome. A fork in the road where one path is safe and the other is dangerous. But real life doesn't work that way. Decisions compound. Exposure accumulates. You don't take one career risk, you take dozens. You don't make one financial decision, you make thousands. You don't choose one strategy, you live inside it. When exposure repeats, the structure of that exposure matters more than any single result. A decision that loses once but teaches you something can be far less risky than a decision that never loses but never teaches you anything either. When you avoid risk entirely, you don't eliminate uncertainty. You just lock in a different kind of exposure. That exposure is stagnation, missed learning, missed feedback, missed optionality. Short-term safety often creates long-term fragility. Systems that never experience stress don't adapt. They don't strengthen. They become brittle. This is why environments that look stable for years can suddenly collapse. They weren't safe. They were untested. They survived not because they were strong, but because nothing challenged them. The irony is that what feels safe in the moment can quietly increase downside over time, not through catastrophe, but through slow erosion. Skills dull, options narrow, confidence becomes dependent on routine rather than competence. You protect yourself from small losses while unknowingly guaranteeing much larger ones later. And because the damage is gradual, it's easy to miss until it's no longer reversible. The hidden edge comes from judging decisions by structure, not outcome, by exposure quality, not immediate results. Good decisions can lose in the short term. Bad decisions can win temporarily. Time reveals the difference. If you judge decisions only by outcomes, you're vulnerable to randomness. You confuse luck with skill, and you mistake survival for progress. You reward results without understanding the process that created them. But when you judge decisions by their structure, you start asking better questions. Does this choice generate feedback? Does it teach me something even if it fails? Does it preserve or expand optionality over time? Risk, when structured correctly, becomes information. It becomes feedback. It becomes a signal you can learn from. Small, controlled exposure creates data. It shows you where your assumptions break. It reveals blind spots you didn't know you had. It forces calibration. Avoiding risk removes that signal. And without feedback, improvement becomes guesswork. You're relying on comfort instead of evidence. This is how intelligent, capable people stay stuck for years without realizing it. They're not reckless. They're careful in ways that prevent learning. They optimize for comfort instead of progress, for preservation instead of direction. They avoid short-term discomfort so effectively that they never develop long-term strength. You can see this pattern across almost every domain. In business, it shows up as playing, not to lose instead of building upside, avoiding experiments because failure might be visible, choosing incremental safety over meaningful leverage. Companies that never test ideas rarely fail dramatically. They simply fade. Competitors who learn faster pass them quietly. In careers, it appears as staying comfortable instead of developing optionality, choosing predictability over skill growth, stability over adaptability. The role stays the same while the world moves on. People in these positions don't feel like they're failing, they feel safe. Until the environment changes and safety disappears all at once. In money, it shows up as avoiding volatility while quietly guaranteeing mediocrity, protecting against short-term swings at the cost of long-term compounding, reducing fluctuation, but also reducing upside. In each case, the logic sounds responsible. The story you tell yourself makes sense. But over time, the trade-off becomes obvious. Comfort replaces growth. Safety replaces learning. Familiarity replaces progress. And because nothing breaks, it feels like success. But the real cost shows up later. As regret, as limitation, as a narrowing set of options, not because you took too much risk, but because you took too little of the right kind. Risk isn't something to eliminate. It's something to structure, limit, and repeat intelligently. The goal isn't certainty, it's direction. Progress over time beats comfort in the moment. Learning beats preservation. Optionality beats stability. When you understand risk properly, you stop fearing it. You stop treating it as something dangerous to be avoided at all costs. You stop confusing silence with safety. You start using risk as a tool, as a filter, as a way to learn faster than people who stay comfortable. You accept small, controlled losses in exchange for insight, adaptability, and long-term advantage. That's the hidden edge most people never see.